Trump's tariff threat was supposed to put Canada on the defensive. Instead, the pressure may be starting to boomerang. Washington delayed a 50% tariff package. Negotiators stayed at the table, and talks are now exploring lower U.S. duties on Canadian-built vehicles, steel, and aluminum. Welcome back to your ultimate pit stop, Piston Pundit. Nothing is final, and Ottawa has not won this fight. But the momentum has shifted, and Detroit may be the reason. Here are 5 developments showing how Canada is gaining leverage, where Trump's tariff strategy is hitting resistance, and why the auto industry could decide what happens next. Number 5. Trump's 50% tariff threat stalls. Canada gains breathing room. Only days ago, Canada seemed headed straight into another tariff collision. Trump threatened 50% duties on roughly $20 billion of Canadian exports under Section 338 of the 1930 Tariff Act. Instead of taking effect Wednesday, Washington granted a 3-day reprieve, moving the deadline to Saturday while negotiators pursued an agreement. The threat is delayed, not dead. Still, Ottawa gained valuable breathing room. Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc and U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer continued talks in Washington as senior negotiators tackled remaining gaps. More importantly, the conversation is shifting from higher tariffs toward potentially lowering existing duties instead on key sectors. That delay buys Canada time, but what negotiators are discussing next could matter far more because the biggest shift may be happening directly on the automotive front. Number 4. Canada pushes auto tariffs lower, 15% within reach. For Canadian manufacturing, this may be the biggest shift yet. Reuters reports that Washington is discussing cutting tariffs on Canadian-built cars and trucks from 25% to 15%, while Canada is reportedly pushing closer to 10%. The proposed rate could also vary according to qualifying U.S.-made content inside Canadian-assembled vehicles. That matters because North American production is tightly integrated. Engines, transmissions, electronics, seats, castings, and software can cross the border repeatedly before final assembly. Tax the finished Canadian vehicle too heavily, and American suppliers can feel the backlash. A reduction would signal a major change in direction entirely. But finished vehicles are only one part of this interconnected machine, because underneath the sheet metal sits another Canadian bargaining chip Washington cannot easily replace. Number 3. Steel and aluminum tariffs could fall. Canada gains ground. Canada's potential relief extends well beyond assembly plants. Canadian steel and aluminum currently face U.S. tariffs of 50%, but Reuters reports the emerging proposal could cut those duties to 25%. A steel quota of roughly 4 million metric tons annually has also been discussed, with shipments above that level potentially facing higher tariffs. For automakers, the stakes are enormous. Canadian aluminum feeds body structures, wheels, suspension components, and EV battery enclosures, while steel supports frames, stampings, pickups, machinery, and factories. These are not decorative imports, they are essential inputs. That industrial dependence gives Ottawa meaningful leverage in negotiations. And that is where this stops being simply a story about tariffs and becomes a story about leverage. Because Canada is seeking relief without automatically giving Washington everything it wants. If you're enjoying the deeper mechanics behind this Canada-U.S. showdown, subscribe to Piston Pundit, because the final 2 developments reveal why Canada's negotiating position may be stronger than the tariff headlines suggest, and why Detroit itself could become Ottawa's most unexpected advantage. Now we reach the part of the negotiation where Canada's willingness to compromise meets the limits Ottawa appears unwilling to cross. Number 2. Canada holds its ground. Washington still needs Canada. Trump wants broader access to Canada for American agriculture, alcohol, vehicles, and other products, but Ottawa is not surrendering every line. Carney has asked premiers to consider restoring U.S. alcohol if Canada secures an acceptable agreement, while dairy supply management remains protected. Energy adds another layer. Keystone XL has resurfaced in broader discussions, though it is not confirmed as a trade concession. The bigger point is strategic. America still values Canadian energy, metals, vehicles, and resources. Canada is diversifying beyond the U.S., but interdependence runs both ways. and Washington still needs many of the inputs Canada supplies daily. And if Washington still needs Canadian resources, its dependence becomes even more obvious when you pop the hood on North America's automotive supply chain. That brings us to Canada's most unexpected source of leverage, Detroit itself. Number 1. Detroit pushes back. Canada's hidden trade leverage emerges. Here is Canada's most powerful card, integration. Washington wants tougher North American vehicle content rules, including at least 50% US-made content and stricter thresholds beyond today's 75% requirement. But Detroit is warning that such changes could backfire. Reuters reports estimates from 2 manufacturers suggesting proposed rules could add at least $2 billion in annual costs per automaker. Ford and General Motors are already absorbing tariff-related expenses. Canadian plants supply metals, engines, components, and assembly capacity across the continent. Make those inputs more expensive, and US automakers pay too, while still competing against Japanese, Korean, and European rivals. That is the contradiction sitting underneath Washington's tariff strategy. The United States can pressure Canadian manufacturing, but the deeper that pressure travels into the supply chain, the greater the chance some of the cost lands back inside American factories. And that brings this entire showdown to its real question. How aggressively can Washington squeeze Canada before the economic pressure starts ricocheting through Detroit? Verdict: Canada's leverage grows. But the fight isn't over. So, is Canada winning this tariff showdown? Not yet. The threatened 50% tariffs have been postponed, not erased, and potential reductions on Canadian vehicles, steel, and aluminum remain under negotiation. But the direction has clearly changed. Canada went from bracing for another tariff hammer to discussing whether auto duties could fall from 25% to 15%, while steel and aluminum tariffs could potentially be cut from 50% to 25%. The bigger story is Canada's structural leverage. Its factories, metals, energy, engines, components, and workers are woven into the same continental supply chain, supporting American manufacturers. Ottawa does not need to overpower the US economy. It needs Washington to recognize that disrupting Canadian production can also raise costs in Detroit. Canada has not won the fight, but its industrial leverage is becoming much harder to ignore. And if these proposed tariff reductions survive the negotiations, the biggest lesson may be that Canada's strongest defense was never matching Washington tariff for tariff. It was reminding Washington just how difficult it is to separate two automotive economies that have spent decades bolting themselves together. So what do you think? Should Canada accept a 15% auto tariff, or keep pushing Washington toward 10%? Should Canadian provinces restore American alcohol if meaningful tariff relief is secured? And is Canada's greatest negotiating weapon actually America's dependence on Canadian automotive, metal, and energy supplies? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments. We want to hear where you think this Canada-U.S. trade showdown is headed. And subscribe to Piston Pundit and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next vehicle updates and upcoming videos. Before you go, check out one of the videos on your screen for more automotive news, industry shifts, and stories that could affect what you drive next. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.